Hey there, it's day 25 of the Techno Evangelist vlog, and today I want to talk about organizing serverless functions on AWS and Azure. You see, a few weeks ago I spoke at RevolutionConf down in Virginia Beach, and my talk was about building a simple application using serverless on AWS, on Azure, and on Google. And I was really impressed with what I saw in Azure. And I wanted to make sure, I kind of talked about it in the video that I did that day, but I want to go into a little bit more detail about what it's like to create functions on Azure. So let's start by looking at a bit of a demo. We'll switch to looking at AWS. So here I am at the AWS console, just logged in as me, and now I'm ready to go. And if I want to switch over to Lambda, I've got a few ways of doing it. First, I can come down to all services and find Lambda in the long list of services. Or because I've used it pretty recently, I can click it right here. Theoretically, I should be able to add other groups here or other services here, but every time I do that, they always disappear. And one thing I tend to do is just come to this search box and type in lam and then click on Lambda. So now I switch over to Lambda and I see all of the Lambdas created by me and other people inside the company. So there's about 150 of them in this account here. Most of them have pretty good names, but that's because they were created by me using the serverless framework. But then others, well, they're just random names, and it's really hard to see how they relate to each other. You can apply tags to functions, but tags don't surface in this list. There's no way to click here and add tags to the list, which would be really convenient. So what you can do is filter. So I added a tag of role to a few of them. So I can click on role, and I can either look at the log collectors or LTI modules or LTI functions, or I can choose all values. So all the Lambdas that have the role tag. But when I do that, it doesn't group them by individual tags. So I don't see the log pushers or the log collectors together. And I do see some of the other things together, but I think that's mostly an accident. Now, of course, I could go in and just say, show me the role that is log or LTI. Now I just see LTI related Lambdas. So it's still really a good idea to create good names for your Lambdas. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to see how they all relate to each other. So let's switch over to Azure and see what it's like over on that side of the fence. So here I am in Azure, and I want to create a new resource. So there's a lot of resources here, perhaps way too many resources. It can be hard to find whichever thing that you care about. And sometimes the same thing is listed as with different names, but I want to choose serverless function app. And so the way that serverless works on Azure is you create an application, and then that application has multiple serverless functions. So each app has a location on azurewebsites.net. So I'm going to call it day 25. Let's call it vlog day 25. Okay, so that works. Subscription is pay as you go. I'm going to use an existing resource group. And I can either choose Windows, Linux Preview, or Docker. Now, Docker is really interesting because if I click that and click on Configure Container, here I can see that I can have control over the container that runs my function. Now, the way that functions work behind the scenes is that on AWS Lambda and on others, you write your serverless function and push it to the cloud service. And then when it comes time to run your serverless function, it's going to spin up a Docker container. Inside that container, you've got a few things that you know about, but generally they're black boxes. And then they run your function. They are extremely fast to spin up, but you don't have any control over that. So anything that you need to have in your function. And sometimes I've needed Git or access to GitHub, and adding some keys. And that means spinning up takes a little bit longer. So if it can already be in the container, well, that solves some interesting problems. And that's what I can do here. I can create my own container. I can put it on Docker Hub or some private registry or Azure Container Registry, and then use that to host my function. So that's pretty slick. Now, I'm not sure what kind of guidance they give about how to make super, super, super fast containers, but and I'm not sure what impact this is going to have on performance, but it's a really neat idea. So I'm going to go back to Function app, and I'll just choose the default of Windows for my OS. I'm going to pin it to the dashboard and create. So now it starts creating my Function app, and it should just take a few seconds. And yep, looks like it's almost ready to go. Okay, so that took about 45 seconds, maybe a minute long, to generate that Function app. So now I can start creating all the things that go in my Function app. Probably one of the best things to create first is a function. So click on the plus sign for a function. You get this kind of odd dialogue, a very different style from everything else that we've seen. And we can choose scenarios, which seem a little bit limiting. And then we can choose a language, which is also different than some of the languages we see later. Or we can create a custom function, or we can create a custom function. So it's a very confusing dialogue. But the best thing to do is create your custom function. So that's what I'm going to do. And notice that we've got a number of functions here. I can scroll through the list, and there's this experimental language support. It's currently disabled, but if I enable it, then I see lots of other languages pop up for HTTP trigger. In fact, I'm going to zoom out of it so you can see all of these. And you can see there's a lot of different things that we can start with, kind of quick starts or templates. So a lot of neat stuff, and many of them have experimental language support. So you can see a lot of them are turning on and off as I enable that button. But I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to zoom back in and choose HTTP trigger JavaScript. And really the only thing we have to configure here at this point is an authorization level. So we can require different keys when we run the function, or we can just choose anonymous, which means anybody who has the URL can run this function. So I'm going to click on create there. And we end up in a pretty nice little UI for editing my function. It's not an IDE, it's not Visual Studio, it's not even Visual Studio Code, but it is pretty slick. I can look at some files that are in here and a testing harness, which is pretty slick. So I'm going to save this. It's an awesome hello world. And now I can go over to the integrate button and add different triggers or inputs or outputs. I can manage it, manage all the keys that are involved here, and also monitor this function. Everything's all in one place. It's really nice. It's a nice place to be. And it's even nicer when I'm at a regular resolution. Now, one thing that's interesting here is I haven't seen yet how I control how much memory this particular serverless function has, how fast it is. I don't really see that. So I'm not sure if I can control that on a per function basis. So that's interesting. But then I can come down to proxies and add a proxy. Proxy is basically just, if I make this available now, people are going to have to know the names of my functions, which might not be the way I want to do it. I might want to have a different naming scheme. And so that's where proxies come in, and slots are just different deployment slots. So I could have a production and development version of the site, and maybe I only want to deploy to development right now. But then we can come back up to the app and switch over to platform features. And now I can control all the other things about my function. But then I can also add logic apps. Logic apps, by the way, is super cool. Imagine all the best things that you remember of Yahoo Pipes and mix that together with Zapier and if this then that, and you kind of get close to logic apps. There are so many different connectors from lots of different tools, and you get to add it all and have, based on some sort of input from one of those things, have your serverless function do some stuff and then push it into other resources on Azure. It's really, really slick. So lots of different tools here. I'm just going to go back to the overview. So one of the things that's really nice here is now all my functions that are related to Vlog Day 25 are all in one place. It just makes sense. It's really, really nice how this works. One downside is if you've got certain serverless functions that you want to reuse across multiple applications, that gets to be hard or impossible. I'm not sure. Maybe I need to copy the source code from one into the other. I'm not really sure how that is going to work. Maybe I can just get the function URL and paste that into the other application. I don't know how to do that. But other than that, I think this is really slick. So how about back on AWS? How do you create a function there? Well, I can click the Create Function button and give it a great name. I'll call it Matt's Cool Function. And I can choose a runtime. I usually like to choose Node.js 8.10. That way I get to have all the cool and sexy things. And role, create a new role from a template. I'll give it a nice name, Matt's Cool Role. And then choose S3 read only. Create my function. And I'm pretty much good to go. It is a awesome, sexy hello Lambda. So I need to add a trigger to this. Click on add, and we are good to go. I can click on save, and my function's all set. So that's how you create a function in Lambda and how you create a function in Azure. And you definitely have, they're just different ways of doing it, depending on which platform you're on. And of course, there's nothing saying that you can't have most of your stuff on, say, AWS and choose to do Azure functions, or the other way around, have all your stuff on Azure and do some Lambda functions. There's nothing saying you can't do that. You can you might have to deal with a little bit of network delay between the two, but you can do some really magical things if you bring in all the best pieces of Azure and AWS and Google and all of the different cloud providers. You can create this really magical solution. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Just kind of go back to what I talked about at that Revolution conference about AWS and Azure and Google. So thanks so much for watching. If you find this video interesting, hit the like button. And if you find this series interesting, well, subscribe, because I'm doing this every day, talking about something that I find really interesting, or something that I learned in the last few days, or just something I want to go into detail about. And it's a lot of fun. So I'd love for you to join us. Again, I'm trying to do it every day. So subscribe and keep me to that. Okay, thanks so much for watching, and goodbye.